Good afternoon, Santa Clarita and Canyon Country. This is Dennis Kennelly, and you're on the legal line, and we'll be discussing immigration issues, which I think will be very, very interesting, but with kind of a unique slant with our guest, David Fulmer, who's an immigration lawyer with offices both in West Los Angeles and out here in Santa Clarita. So he'll be somebody, if you hear something you like, or if he rings a bell as far as a service he can provide you, you'll find somebody local to do it. We've got our news director with us today, Perry Smith. Perry, what's new with the news?
Thanks for the invite, Dennis. Appreciate it. And we, community-wide, we tend to isolate ourselves from Santa Clarita because we don't get a lot of the big city problems, but we've had one of them kind of come up on our doorstep.
And what recently. Is that?
And that is the heroin overdose epidemic.
No kidding.
Obviously, opioids are not new to anywhere, and but more recently, since Sunday night, we've had a string of overdoses that have really caused concern in the community locally. The city, the sheriffs, and our local substance abuse counselors have been working to address the issue, which is that 10 people have overdosed since Sunday.
Any fatalities so far?
Unfortunately, there was one individual who was found deceased at Bouquet Canyon Park off of Wellston, up there in Saugus, and he was locked in the restroom, and deputies came in and saw him overdose, and it was too far. He was too far gone to save. The other 9 people have been saved by Henry Mayo staff, so give them a little shout out.
I will.
That's I think that they've done some great work, and they've been proactive about getting some information out to the community, which we've been trying to help with. So,
what's the age group of the ODs?
That's the one of the more troubling things. It's 18 to 24. It's really young kids, really, and people, you don't know what you get when you buy some of these street drugs, obviously. So people aren't aware of what they're putting in their bodies, and it's killing them. So.
Well,
definitely something I just want to get the word out about. Just, obviously be careful.
Sheriff's close on breaking it or not?
They're definitely investigating it, but I mean, it's one of those situations where I'm sure they know a lot more than what they can say, obviously, for their investigation. So, and I know that they're active, and they have a J team that works on just these kind of investigations. So I know they're working on it, and I know they're proactively investigating, and is how close they are to catching the person we don't know, because obviously they don't want us to know. But I would imagine, basically talking to the experts and talking to the officials, that they probably know where it's coming from. It's probably not local, and it's just a matter of time.
Okay, well, I hope that this is a warning to anybody out there to watch what you put in your body. Believe me.
Yeah, right.
It may sound like fun, but I'm sure these. Certainly one of them, and the other 9 are not very, very happy about what they took. So our thoughts and prayers are with the deceased and the deceased family, and the 9 I wish a speedy recovery to. Okay, thank you much.
Hey, thanks for
having me on,
Des. Appreciate it. Anytime.
National news that affects things legally. We've got the new Trump tax plan. If you can figure it out, nobody can, because they're not releasing any details. It's just a promise that everybody's going to like it, and the middle class is going to pay less, and no middle class person is going to get their taxes increased. But we don't have any details yet. So when there's some details released, we'll be able to comment on it, because the first thing every one of us is going to do is go to our most recent tax return and see what we paid, and then look at the new proposal and see how much we're going to pay under that. And that's probably going to determine the way we vote. So that's coming. Now, today's guest, David Fulmer, is an experienced immigration attorney, and he's got a firm that does basically nothing but immigration. And he does all aspects of it. And there's a lot of talk and controversy about the wall and things like that, but there's a lot more to immigration law than that. And David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate it.
And why don't you give us some of your background? I think the folks out there would be interested.
Sure. Thanks, Dennis. Years and years ago, when I was thinking about going to law school, I had to do a personal statement talking about what kind of law I might want to do. And even at that early stage, I had an interest in immigration law. At that point, I had taken a year off of college, and I worked in the travel industry, and I worked for a company. And two of my supervisors were great individuals, and they were Japanese, and abruptly they had to leave the United States because their visas were not approved. So when I was applying for law school, I thought I might be interested in immigration law, and after my first year in law school, I was able to secure a clerkship with an immigration attorney. Upon graduation, I got a job as an associate in an immigration law firm, and for 20 years, I've worked in immigration law. And now, as you mentioned, I have an office in West Los Angeles where I've worked for 20 years, and this past September, I opened the Santa Clarita office.
Well, that's great. So you give somebody in our listening audience an opportunity not to have to drive all the way down to West LA or downtown to get the advice they need. How can people reach you just if they want to contact you now? You have a website? You have a phone number? Best way to get you?
Yes, the best way to contact me is through my website, www.usworkvisa.com. The number of the Santa Clarita office is 661-200-0775.
Speaking of phone numbers, our phone number here, if you have any questions or comments or just want to chat with us, is 661-298-5487, KHTS, or you can catch us on Facebook, or you can email us. And go to the website, the station website, to find out how to email us. And if we get more information on that, I'll give it to you a little later. So, David, the first thing I want to talk about, and it's been in the news, are so-called H1B visas. Why don't you explain what an H1B visa is?
Sure. H1B visas are the primary visa that is used by universities, corporations, and in various different industries across the country to bring highly skilled professional workers into the United States. In order to obtain an H-1B visa, the employer has to have a position that requires a specific bachelor's degree. Not just any bachelor's degree, but specific training. And the individual has to have at least that specific degree. Some examples that are given in the law are accountants, engineers, teachers, and lawyers. In other words, positions that an accountant requires specific training in accounting. An engineer requires specific training in engineering. And the government, Congress, allows for 65,000 new H-1Bs every year, plus an additional 20,000 for people with U.S. master's degrees. And universities are exempt from this cap. So universities can bring in any number of H-1Bs every year.
Okay, now, you mentioned accountants, engineers, and lawyers. The country is overrun with accountants, engineers, and lawyers. Why would we need a visa like this?
Well, the law simply gives examples of certain professions that are what we call specialty occupations, but it leaves it open for any specialty occupation to receive, to be eligible for an H-1B visa. So if a company has a need for a highly trained computer programmer, that would qualify. Or if a management consulting firm had a need for a highly trained consultant, that would qualify for an H-1B. It's really wide open for any position that might require specific bachelor's level training.
Okay, if I'm a company and I decide I need an H-1B visa, I'm having trouble filling a particular position, how do I go about it? What do I do?
Well, because Congress has put this numeric cap on the number of H-1Bs that can be issued, a company really has to plan ahead. The government's year for H-1B purposes starts every October 1st. So this new batch of 65,000 plus 20,000 visas is available every October 1st. And in order to file for one of these, the government allows companies to start applying for them 6 months before October 1st or April 1st. So every April 1st, there's a frenzy to secure one of these 85,000 slots. Over the last few years, the number of applications has exceeded the number of available slots exponentially. And this year, in the first 5 days of April, which is the H1B filing period, there were 199,000 applications for the 85,000 slots. So a company has to start early and apply and then get lucky, essentially. They have to be selected in a random drawing.
So what you're telling me is it's basically a 1 in 3 shot.
Essentially, right. Unless the employer is a university, and then they can be, it's almost guaranteed that they'll get one.
Okay, now, is there any need for a showing of necessity by the company? Does the company have to prove to anybody, hey, I can't fill this job with existing resources within the existing work pool, if you will, or applicant pool?
The short answer is no. The long answer is there are some safety measures that are built in. First of all, there's something called the required wage that must be paid to H1B workers. The required wage is the higher of the prevailing wage that is paid to all, let's use an example, all engineers in Santa Clarita. That would be the prevailing wage. And we get that from a government source. And the actual wage is what's paid within a company. And an employer has to pay an H1B worker the required wage, which is the higher of the two. So the idea is that this is not supposed to be low-paid workers that are undercutting the wages of U.S. workers and therefore essentially giving employers the incentive to hire foreign workers instead of U.S. workers. It's supposed to be a level playing field. The other thing that makes it even...
We lost you.
Then increases... Sorry?
Oh, we lost you for a minute. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Go on. It's supposed to increase?
Yeah, it's supposed to essentially not give an incentive to U.S. companies to hire foreign workers over U.S. workers because they have to pay the foreign worker the same rate that they would have to pay that they pay all the rest of the U.S. workers, and on top of that, they have to pay attorney fees and filing fees. There's a law, the Department of Labor regulation that says that the government filing fees and legal fees for an H-1B must be borne by the employer, and this is thousands of dollars. This could be $5,000, $6,000, $7,000
Per employee.
Per employee, exactly. And so an employer still has an incentive to look for a U.S. worker, and if they can't find one, then sometimes they bite the bullet and pay the government filing fees and go through the process to try to secure one for a foreign worker.
Okay, how do they find these foreign workers? That's an interesting question.
Generally, the way that it works is that an employer, let's say they have some type of specialized position, they're having a hard time filling it. They search on the internet and job boards, and they contact recruiters. They have various applicants, and some of them happen to be foreign students who attend U.S. schools who apply for the jobs. And that's where most of them come from, either foreign students or sometimes they're actually transferees that are transferred from a company's home base in another country into the U.S.
Okay, now if I manage to get a company, let's say, fills a position with one of these people on an H1B visa, how long is it good for?
The H-1B visa is initially good for 3 years. It's renewable for 3 more years for a total of 6 years.
Okay.
And that can be extended if the company pursues permanent residence for the employee.
Okay, so
it's the cap is 3 plus 3.
So it's the company that would have to pursue permanent residence, not the individual, correct?
Right, exactly.
But it might be a good idea to check with the individual to see if he wants to stay, he or she wants to stay.
Oh, of course, but most of the time they want to stay. If they're working in a company, they're happy with their job, and there's usually consensus between the employer and the employee that, hey, this is working out. And so when it's working out like that, then both parties want a long-term employer-employee relationship to continue, and that's when the company starts the employment-based permanent residence process.
Okay, what happens at the end of the 6 years if the employee and the let's say either of two things happen. Either the employee does not want to seek permanent residency or is unable to for some reason. What happens? Do they have to go back?
Unless they can secure some other status, then yes, they have to go back. Generally what happens is an employee will be working and trying to impress his employer and perhaps ask his supervisor if they could start the permanent residence process. And ultimately, if the employer doesn't do it, the employee will usually go job hunting and find another company that will do it for them.
But they can't quit the job they have until they get another company to sponsor them, correct?
Exactly. If they quit their job, they have a 60-day grace period. So after 60 days, they become out of status, they're illegal, and they're deportable. And so generally speaking, if they can, they'll hang on to their job, look elsewhere, and then a new employer will file the paperwork to bring them over.
Okay, just so all of us know, and I think we'll get into this next, but how much does it cost the company to make an application for permanent residence for one of their H-1Bs?
There are various different expenses. First of all, they have to advertise the position. The Department of Labor regulations require that in order for the company to secure permanent residence for an employee, they have to advertise and show that there were no U.S. workers available.
Okay.
These ads usually cost about $2,000. The government filing fees cost over $3,000, and then there are legal fees, of course.
Yeah, now you represent
several $1,000s.
You represent companies that are trying to secure H-1B visas for prospective employees, correct?
That's right.
Good. Well, legal fees then are very important. I understand that.
Of course, yes.
Okay, so let's get a what if. What if the company advertises and let's say 2 or 3 qualified applicants show up and say, I'd like to fill this job. And then the company has a decision to make. Do we hire the new applicant or do we keep our H-1B person? What happens if the H-1B person is found not the most qualified, that one of the locals can fill the job? Okay.
Well, Dennis, we're lawyers, and so we have to look at what we're trying to do and what the legal standard is. For the purposes of securing permanent residency, the standard is not most qualified, but is minimally qualified. So what the company has to prove is that there were no U.S. workers who even met the minimum qualification. Even if the foreign worker is more qualified, if there was a U.S. worker that was minimally qualified, then the company cannot move forward with the permanent residence application.
Okay.
Doesn't mean they have to let the H-1B worker go under the current rules, but it means that they cannot secure permanent residency for the H-1B worker, which means essentially that at the end of the 6 years, they would have to leave.
Okay. Unless, well, at the end of the 6 years, are they free at that point if they can get another sponsor to apply for permanent residency?
No. The rule says that when they get to the end of the 6 years, they can get more than 6 years if they meet one of 2 tests. Number one, if an employer has started the permanent residence or green card process at least a year, 365 days ago, then they can get more time. Or if an employer has started the process and reached the second of 3 stages, then they can get more time. If neither of those have happened, then the employee is probably going to have to go back home unless he's able to secure status in another method like going back to school and becoming a student again, or maybe marrying a U.S. citizen or something like that.
Okay, and we will get back to more of this after a brief break. This is Dennis Kennelly. You're on the Legal Line.